To Gaza now, where Israeli troops yesterday have raided the largest hospital in the Strip.
The medical humanitarian organisation, the MSF, said the situation was chaotic, with patients left behind and staff unaccounted for. Well, journalist Noga Tarnopolsky joins us from Jerusalem. A very good morning to you. Once again, we've seen the IDF denying they were bombing hospitals. We've now seen the pictures. They're now openly admitting to several. This is a medical facility. The pictures are absolutely shocking, with doctors running in all directions, smoke in the air. And of course, caught in the middle of all this are patients.
Yep. What the Israeli army has said, and what has been the case in each of the hospitals, this is now one in Khan Yunis in southern, the Nasser Hospital, Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. We went through the same kind of a terror and questioning earlier in this war when Israel operated in the Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Hamas has turned these hospitals into basically shields for themselves and operates at Hamas itself, the terror group, both underneath the hospital and inside the hospital. And that is why Israel feels justified, the Israeli army feels justified in operating these hospitals. I think there are a lot of accusations that will eventually be, figured out whether Israel did or did not follow international law and the law of war in its actions. But there's no question about the complication of a situation in which Israel has good reason, has solid reason to believe that either its hostages in captivity are being held in these hospitals, or that the cadavers of hostages murdered in captivity are being held in these hospitals, and therefore acts. And then the catastrophe that we see, in fact, every time for the civilians, the patients, the wounded, those who are using the hospital facilities legitimately and are caught suddenly in an absolute war zone.
It's just, the head of the hospital described it as catastrophic. And looking at those pictures, you actually can't imagine how traumatizing it would be for people receiving treatment there to suddenly realize they're in the middle of this raid. No, part of the reason that the IDF did this is because they've learned from hostages in the past who've been released that they've been kept in places like hospitals. What is the intelligence that Israel has that makes them believe this is why they need to take such extreme action as this?
I don't know what the intelligence is. I'm not in the army, as you can imagine. I can only tell you what the army says and what the army shows us. So I just don't have the answer to that. We do know that Israel's operating using intelligence from various sources, not only released hostages in an attempt to try to free those who are still in captivity, and they can. There was a case earlier this week when 2 men were freed from captivity in Rafah, another city in southern Gaza. That was a much smaller operation. It also caused, I believe, some loss of life. But the Israeli aim, and in that case it was successful, was to save living hostages.
Just moving on, Israel came up with a proposal, a four-corner plan for the future. Hamas rejected that, came up with its own proposals. Netanyahu has said nothing other than total victory will suffice. Now, clearly, there are 1.5 million people sheltering in really dreadful conditions. How do you see this playing out? And what does this do in terms of the way the international community are watching and the support they are giving Israel?
I'm not sure what plans you're asking about. I haven't heard of any day after plans presented by Israel or by Hamas. I've heard of certain hopes for the administration of Gaza presented principally by the United States. Maybe you're talking about the negotiations for the hostage release as underway in Cairo now, but I don't think.
Well,
Sorry.
Israel essentially came out with a plan for Gaza. It basically wanted a multinational force to rebuild it. It wanted an independent authority to run it. Hamas has said absolutely not. And in terms of actually letting those hostages free, they have come up with their own demands. Netanyahu seems to be very clear. Nothing other than total obliteration of Hamas in Gaza will suffice. Does that mean the international community stay on side with Israel?
I think that Israel right now is already in a situation of great tension and maybe even crisis with the United States, that's been its principal ally, and with other allied nations. I think that the reason you're not hearing, I guess, a more strident take vis-a-vis Israel are two reasons. One, the nature of the October 7th attack perpetrated by Hamas, which other nations' leaders feel very fearful of. And the other is a general, I think, hope in the Arab world. This is very important among Arab leadership and in the Western world. Excuse me. A general view that Hamas brought about its own end with that attack perpetrated against Israel. That said, so I haven't heard of any plans, not from Israel, not from anyone else. I've heard a lot of rumors about other kinds of plans. But I think that the longer Prime Minister Netanyahu sticks to these things, that sound like election slogans, all out victory, absolute victory, you know, destroying them completely. It's almost like listening to an 8-year-old boy playing a game with a friend. And these statements of his have never been given any concrete parameters. So Israelis and foreign leaders have no idea what he's really aiming for, talking about. I think as long as that situation persists and we see the Israeli army continue to act with no clear strategic stated goals on the field, I think Israel absolutely runs the risk of losing the support of its most important allies.
We've heard comments almost to that effect from Joe Biden. Noga, thank you so much, live there from Jerusalem.